What's going on, guys? And welcome. Today we are going to be talking about Bardin's weapons across all of his careers. Now, this is an updated melee weapon tier list. I haven't done one of these in a long time, and new weapons have been released since then. The big balance beta has happened since a lot of my tier lists have been put out. So I figured, and I've been asked many times, to update this list. So that's what I'm going to do today. So starting us off in D tier, I've got the one-handed hammer. And for today's tier list, we are going to be making use of the Armory mod, which gives you pretty much any sort of information that you would want to know or need to know about a weapon. So shout out to Fracticality, the creator of this mod. Excellent work. For the hammer, as you can see, attack speed, it's pretty fast for most attacks. Light attack 1 and light attack 4 stand out to me as being kind of slow. That's not great considering its base damage is not super high, especially for those two attacks. So, those being slow in particular is not that great. As you can see here, its cleave limit is pretty low, not even breaking 6 on any attack, which I guess kind of makes sense because it's a hammer. It's not going to cleave a whole lot. But on the other side of the coin here, your stagger force, pretty high on those first two light attacks. Pretty low on the second two light attacks, the push attack a lot, and then the two heavy attacks, surprisingly, kind of not that much. The base damage, this is probably the weakest area of this weapon, very low for every attack, doesn't crack 30 even on the heavy attacks. These aren't headshots, by the way, these are body shots, but still, these first two light attacks and the push attack, noticeably low damage. That's not great. Against armor, the first two light attacks and the push attack, again, they don't even do anything against armor. You have to either light attack 3 times to be able to deal damage to armor, or the better option, do heavy attacks, which, again, don't do that much damage to armor. The two saving graces of this weapon is that it's got 4.5 stamina shields, which is a lot. Probably, it's pretty close to what a shield has. I think a shield has 5.5, something like that. So it's a pretty good defensible weapon. And it's got tank mass modifiers on here. And this third attack gets plus 10% crit chance because it's an uppercut. And then, of course, the push attack also gets a tank mass modifier. This basically just lets you swing through more mass, if that makes any sense. Tank, I believe, is the one that is good for armor. Down here, your effective block angle is 90 degrees. Inner and outer block cost modifiers, 1/2 and 2. 20% dodge bonus, which is not too bad. 3 for an effective dodge count is pretty average. Inner and outer push angles, 100 and 180. And then the push radius, 2.5. So now that you have all the information for the hammer, let me just tell you that I don't like this weapon very much at all. Yeah, you have a lot of stamina. Yeah, you can, block with it a lot, and it's good for defense to a degree, but this weapon has some pretty clunky attacks. I mean, its light attacks are diagonal and all over the place. It's not great for hordes, it's not that great for armor, it just doesn't really shine in any one area outside of blocking. And to me, that's kind of lame. This weapon is easily in the D tier. Luckily, there is only one weapon that I believe belongs in D tier. So moving on to C tier, the first weapon I have in there is Axe and Shield. Now, this weapon used to be one of my favorites. It always had that bash attack that was great for making temp health, and it's a shield, it's got 5 stamina, it's still really good with the bash for making temp health. The problem is with this weapon is that you don't really kill much of anything. I mean, take a look at this first heavy attack. That does 7 damage. That's your bash, of course. Followed by a heavy attack 2, which is the combination that I like to go with when I'm using this weapon. Bash followed by a heavy attack. This is, it's not tremendous damage, but again, you have no cleave at all. Look at the cleave here, 2.24. That's not that much. And it doesn't stagger that much either. Not until you get to that third heavy attack where you get some numbers that are kind of nice. It's not super slow or anything. It's just really the only purpose of this weapon, I think, is to make temp health. Which kind of sucks because this weapon used to be really fun, but unfortunately, in my opinion, the hammer and shield makes this weapon pretty irrelevant. The one thing it does have going for it is that it is pretty, alright against armor damage. All of its attacks, except its first heavy attack for some reason, does pretty good armor damage. So if you've ever bashed a storm vermin and thought you were doing damage to it, sad to say, not the case. Its dodge count is low, it doesn't get a dodge bonus. Its block angle's good, its, inner and outer push angles. This is going to be the same for all weapons, by the way. So I don't even know how to evaluate a stat like this when they're all the same. But its block angle, of course, it's a shield, good for defense, it makes sense. Its damage isn't off the charts or anything, it's not really particularly great for armor. You can't cleave a whole lot with it. There's just not much you can do with this kind of weapon. So I have it in the C tier. The next weapon I have in C tier is the one-handed axe. Now the one-handed axe has pretty decent speed and actually does some pretty decent damage. Its heavy attacks are really good at taking out elites. It does, pretty solid armor damage. A lot of its attacks get this 10% bonus crit damage here. It's only got a few stamina shields, but that's okay because its effective dodge count is 6 with a 20% dodge bonus, which is really nice. So you're not going to need to necessarily block that much with it when you can just kind of dodge out of the way. The one thing about this weapon, though, which leaves it, unfortunately, in C tier, is low cleave, which pretty much makes this a one-trick pony. Only capable of dealing with armor, and not really so great for hordes. Unfortunate, but maybe they'll give it a linesman or something one day. But until that happens, it's just an elite killer. The final weapon I have today in C tier is the Warpick. When looking at the Warpick stats, the first thing that jumps off the page to me is its attack speed here. Only its push attack gets below 0.8 seconds. This weapon is really, really slow, and yeah, it does a lot of damage on that first heavy attack and that second heavy attack. Charged or not, really, it's still pretty good damage. Even good armor damage as well. Even though it's got that, it is so slow. They tried to buff it by giving it these linesman modifiers on its first 2 light attacks to allow it to kind of deal with hordes more easily. I still feel like this weapon is too slow and too clunky to make work very good. It's only got 3 stamina, its dodge count is only 2, it doesn't get a dodge bonus. It's just not great. It's got alright cleave and pretty decent stagger force on these light attacks, but the damage is very low, only 14 on those light attacks. Its heavy attacks do great damage, its push attack is, serviceable, I suppose, but I really think the slow attack speed of this weapon hurts it in a big way. So I've got it in the C tier. Bumping up to B tier, I've got the Great Axe. Now the reason I have the Great Axe above the Warpick, even though it's got the same dodge count, dodge distance, is that it's capable of both dealing with hordes and elites. Let's check out its base damage. Nearly 30 for most attacks, that's pretty good. Armor damage, capable. But look at this, the push attack, the first heavy attack, the second heavy attack, all get a linesman modifier, which means it can cleave through those little clan rats, those chaos infantry, as well as deal with armor. Not only can the heavy attack deal with armor, as can the light attacks. I mean, look at the base damage on this light attack. All 3 of them, almost 30, and almost, 18 armor damage. That's pretty good. And the third light attack, because it's an uppercut, gets 10% extra crit chance. Quite nice. Now some of these are a little slow, as you can see here, 0.74 seconds on the third light attack, 0.76 seconds on the push attack, a little bit slow, and that can leave you open to attacks. But I think for the most part, pretty good cleave on these heavy attacks make it pretty decent for hordes. That is the only weapon I have in the B tier, however, so now we will move on to A tier. First weapon I've got in there is the Great Hammer. Whenever I talk about the Great Hammer, my favorite things to bring up are these 2 heavy attacks here. Heavy Attack 1 and Heavy Attack 2, not only are they fast, have decent cleaves and stagger force, they have tank modifiers, and pretty decent damage against infantry and armor. Of course, its light attacks are going to be much higher damage as they don't cleave as much, as you can see here. But this weapon is one of those that can do it all. It's got the same effective dodge count, dodge distance, and stamina shields as the Great Axe, but I think its motions are a little bit more consistent. Its heavy attacks are pretty quick for the size of the weapon and the damage that it does deal, which is important. And I think is enough to elevate this weapon into A tier status. My second A tier weapon today are the dual axes. So even though the dual axes have only 2 stamina shields, they've got 6 effective dodges and a 25% dodge bonus, which is really big. Also, swinging these weapons allows you to run faster, so it can give you a movement bonus, which is kind of the little niche, fun thing to do with this weapon. It helps because a lot of its light attacks, which you would use to run faster, are pretty quick. The first 3 are all under half a second, which is nice, and even the 4th one's not that much slower. The push attack's pretty quick too at only 0.62. The first heavy attack is 0.58. The only really slow ones are, the second and third heavy attacks, so that's pretty decent. The cleave's low, but it's a finesse weapon, so it's going to do extra damage from headshots, which is really good. The base damage here, not overly impressive for body shots, but capable of dealing with armor on all of its attacks, which is really nice. Doesn't get any special properties, unfortunately, but this weapon, while not amazing for hordes, gives you some utility and movement, lets you do some nice things in terms of armor damage, and has a lot of potential to do extra damage if you can get headshots. This one's a fun one to use, and it's great for clutching and focusing on elites. I've got it in the A tier. And that's going to bring us to S tier. I have 3 weapons in S tier. The first one are the dual hammers. So why the dual hammers over the dual axes, you might wonder? Well, to start it off, got 4 stamina shields, only a 3 effective dodge count, 15% dodge bonus. That's not bad, by the way. This is pretty much like 3 dodge count is pretty average. 15% dodge bonus isn't terrible. So decent defense on this weapon. The light attacks pretty fast, the first 3 of them, well 4 of them even. The push attack really fast at 0.36 seconds. And even the heavy attacks aren't too slow. Decent amounts of cleave and stagger force on most of the attacks lets you deal with enemies quite nicely. And the base damage for light attacks a little bit low until you get to the 4th one. A push attack with this weapon will allow you to move faster, so a similar scenario to what you would have with the dual axes. Unfortunately, this one has to use stamina to do that, but the best part of this weapon are these tank modifiers here. The first 3 light attacks and the second 2 heavy attacks all get a tank modifier, allowing them to deal with multiple armored targets, which is quite nice. And from light attack 4, push attack, and the first 3 heavy attacks are all capable of dealing armor damage. It's not fantastic for armor, but its defense and combination of dealing with multiple enemies at once make the dual hammers really, really nice. Next S tier weapon we have is the Cog Hammer. Now you can think of the Cog Hammer as basically the dwarf's version of an executioner sword. Low dodge count, no dodge bonus, 3 stamina shield, doesn't make it great for defense. However, this is a weapon where offense is going to work as your defense. Its light attacks have these kind of, uppercutty motions, diagonal looking things, quite nice. You have pretty good cleave on these light attacks, really good stagger force so you can knock things around, and all 4 of them have the tank modifier, which will allow you to deal with multiple armored targets, which is invaluable. The tank mass modifier, in my opinion, is the best one that a weapon could have, because armored targets obviously are the hardest to kill, they're the most threatening. I mean, look how little damage it does against armored targets. So having the tank here is quite nice because you can deal with multiple ones at once. You can stagger them out of the way, and you can chop them with your heavy attacks. Speaking of which, look at the damage on these heavy attacks. Both 1 and 2, about 46 base damage. This is not headshots, by the way. This is body shots. And the armor damage is nice as well, almost 40. All the attacks are fairly quick, most of them under 0.7 seconds. The only one a little bit longer is the push attack, and that's fine, as you're probably not going to bust this one out too much. This weapon is fast, it does good damage, it can hit multiple targets at once, it does good damage against both infantry and armored targets. You can hit multiple armored targets at once, you can hit multiple infantry at once, you can stagger quite a bit with those light attacks. This weapon is really good. And then rounding it out in S tier, the final weapon today, the Hammer and Shield. So the Hammer and Shield is an excellent weapon. This one used to be the worst until they reworked it a little bit, and now it's great. On top of it having 5 stamina shields, this weapon is good for one sequence, and that is a push attack, which is really fast, does pretty good damage, and can deal with armor, followed by a light attack. That push attack chains into a third light attack, which is also pretty fast, really good damage, and pierces armor. Not only that, it's an uppercut, so it gets a 10% crit chance, and it's got a tank modifier on it, so you can hit multiple armored targets at once. The bash isn't listed on here as well, but that now comes first in the sequence of attacks, of heavy attacks for this weapon, so keep that in mind. It used to not. It used to come like second, it used to come second, which used to mean that the Axe and Shield was a better choice, but not anymore. Because this one is so good at dealing with armor, and you can make the temp health as easily as an Axe and Shield. It kind of outclasses it in every way. Plus, it's got these tank modifiers here, so if you want to do something outside of a push attack L3, you have some options. And all of its attacks are pretty quick, especially the ones you're going to use. 0.42 is ridiculously fast, followed by a 0.63, again, pretty quick as well. Not much on the dodges, but it's a shield weapon with a lot of stamina. Put some block cost reduction on it, you'll be fine. This weapon is great for mowing your way through elites. So that's my list, guys. In S tier I had the Hammer and Shield, the Cog Hammer, and the Dual Hammers. In A tier I had the Great Hammer and the Dual Axes. In B tier I had the Great Axe. In C tier I have the Axe and Shield, One-Handed Axe, and Warpick. And then down in D tier I had the One-Handed Hammer. If you liked this video, consider subscribing to my channel, liking the video, leaving a comment, maybe even joining my Discord. Link will be in the description down below. Let me know what you think about Bardin's weapons, how they stack up against each other, which ones you like to use, and of course let me know what I got wrong or right in this list. And have yourselves a nice day.